You can still hear me, right? I'm going to take this off.
Did you turn it off?
Now it's on. Okay.
Okay.
All right, Maquoketa's Missing Medieval Mirror. 1938 article published in Maquoketa's Centennial Edition lists the present-day mirror owners as Mrs. Calkins. Quotes from the article: visions of Lord and ladies of Elizabeth, England, and of the gay life of English Tories in America during pre-revolutionary days have been reflected by the 401-year-old mirror owned by Mrs. George Calkins of Maquoketa. This mirror, which had hung on the wall in the homes of Mrs. Calkins' ancestors for 3 generations, has also reflected scenes of Yankee life along the Atlantic seaboard and of pioneer activities in eastern Iowa. The glass, which was 14 inches wide and 26 inches long with a 2-inch wooden frame, was brought from England to America just before the Revolutionary War. And this is not the original picture of the mirror. First owner of the mirror was Colonel Abijah Willard. Abijah Willard was a soldier during the French and Indian War who wrote a journal during the expulsion of the Acadians. During King George's War, he fought in the siege of Louisbourg in 1745. During the French and Indian War, he fought in the Battle of Fort Beauséjour. On the eve of the American Revolution, Willard was imprisoned in Connecticut. He went with the Loyalists in Boston and left for Halifax, Nova Scotia. He returned to New York, but was again evacuated to Nova Scotia, then known as New Brunswick, in 1938. Colonel Abijah Willard had been commissioned by the King of England at the outbreak of the war. The next mirror owner was the father of Amasa Allen. Quote from the article: all Tory property was confiscated by the American government and was sold at public auction. This mirror being bought by the father of Amasa Allen. Amasa's father, Abel Allen, was born in 1756 in Lancaster, Massachusetts, and died in 1843 in Vermont. Abel had served as a soldier in the American Revolution. Abel Allen married Mary Simons in 1785. They were the parents of Daphne Allen Lewis, Abel, and Amasa Allen. The next owner was Amasa Allen, a relative of Ethan Allen of the Green Mountain Boys from Vermont. When Mr. Allen came west many years later, he brought with him the mirror, which his father had purchased. In the meantime, the looking glass had been reframed and a paper dated in England in 1537 was found, thus giving the age of the relic. Amasa Allen and his wife, Margaret Curtis, came to Iowa with the Stantons and settled in the eastern part of Iowa. They all moved from Mariah, Essex County, New York. He was a shoemaker and a class leader in the Wesleyan Methodist Church. They had 2 sons and 8 daughters. Their son, Amasa, was an enlisted Union soldier, 1st Sergeant, Iowa 24th Infantry, who died of disease while serving and was lost at war. Amasa had married Agnes Burwell Lamson in 1855. In about 1880, Amasa Allen presented the mirror to his daughter Melissa, then Mrs. Alvin Dean of Smithtown, located in Clinton County, and it was located near Lost Nation. Laura Melissa Allen married Alvin Amos Dean in 1864. They were the parents of Dora Dean Cook, Violet T. Dean Calkins, and Pearl Weston Dean. Later, Mrs. Alvin Dean gave the mirror to her own daughter, Violet. Violet Dean and George Calkins, who married in 1895, were the parents of Merle Dean, Gladys, Clyde George, and Alma Calkins. Mrs. Calkins also had several interesting old books. including her father's diary and account book from 1880 to 1885. The article said the mirror was tarnished with age and presented a plain but darkened reflection, and that Mrs. Calkins no longer used it, although she kept it readily accessible to show her friends. The article stated, "If that mirror could only talk," her visitors sighed, "think what stories it would tell. Think of the girls it has sent off to parties." No doubt ladies in their tightly bodiced, ornate gowns preened before it, beautiful Tory women decked out with full skirts and curls piled high. It may be that more than one shy Yankee lass took a fleeting glimpse as she started off to a quilting bee. Perhaps the Iowa maid, Melissa Allen, saw her starry-eyed reflection in it as she left her father's home with her new husband. Where that mirror now is a mystery. After contacting the Calkins family, I learned that they never heard of the mirror, and that anyone that might have known, the other generations are all deceased. So this relic was on exhibit in a downtown store during Maquoketa's centennial celebration. The centennial celebration was a 4-day event that promised to attract the largest crowd in the history of the community. The dedication stated, "To Maquoketa of yesterday, of today, and of tomorrow, we dedicate this centennial edition to Maquoketa's old settlers, both living and dead, who courageously faced hardships, that they might make new homes in the Middle West. To present-day Maquoketans, the descendants of the pioneers, who must carry the spirit through the years to the next line of descendants. And to future Maquoketans, the citizens of tomorrow, who must continue the work of building up a city which before you have given, that Maquoketa's second centennial may be even more glorious." Maquoketa began its celebration of its 100th anniversary on Sunday, August 14, 1938. Special services were held at each church. Monday was designated as Old Settlers Day. Guests and old settlers attended an open house at the country club. The country club was built in 1934 and was the outgrowth of the old Riverview Country Club at Lakehurst, or Pinhook as it was known at one time. Following the disbanding of the Riverview Club, the club property was turned over to the newly formed Maquoketa Park Association, which, and this is in 1939, boasted 128 stockholders. The country club had more than 100 members. Officers were Robert Grappengetter, am I pronouncing that right? Grappengetter? President, S.V. Francis, Vice President, John Dick, Secretary, and Lewis S. Lean, Treasurer. The building stood on the old fairgrounds property. It was said to have one of the finest golf courses in eastern Iowa. Robert Grappengetter, known as Bob the Florist, was active in Masonic and Eastern Star circles, past Grand Patron of the Order of Eastern Star in Iowa, a member of the State Executive Committee of the Order of Rainbow for Girls of Iowa, and was the Grand Captain General of Knights Templar of Iowa. His business was located in what is now a parking lot, located on West Pleasant Street, 1 block of Main Street. How many of you bought flowers from Bob the Florist? I remember buying a turkey planter there when I was little.
Wait a minute, there was Knights Templar here?
That's what I was just going to ask.
Unless he actually lived, he did not live in Maquoketa, I don't believe. I think he was from the Quad Cities. So,
Yeah, but I didn't even know they were in Iowa.
yeah, I don't know. I think I got that from his obituary though, so. Secretary John Dick listed in the 1940 census at age 33, having been born in Pennsylvania in about 1907. He was living at 106 East Locust Street, as shown in this photo, with his wife Lucille and daughter Mary Jane. He had completed 4 years of college and was employed as a cashier at Jackson State Savings Bank. Shown is a picture of Lewis and Ruth Lean. Lewis Lean, treasurer, was second vice president at the bank, and they were the parents of Larry and Don. Anybody know the Leans?
Yeah, I've heard of them.
The Old Fiddlers Contest was held on Monday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Tuesday was designated as Governor's Day. Activities began with the parade at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The parade had 7 divisions: Pioneer, Indian, Historic, Religious, Patriotic, Commercial, and Rural. A massed band composed of the local school band and organizations from Lost Nation and other nearby towns presented a concert. Another band concert was held at the pageant grounds at 7:45, preceding the pageant. Oxen appeared at the local centennial pageant. Owned by Vern Hoot, local auctioneer, the oxen pictured here played an important role in the centennial program. At that time, arrangements were underway for their showing at World's Fairs in both New York and California. Olive Opal Stanton was the daughter of Harry Wilcox and Lily Ann Stanton. No? I got that wrong? That's not Opal?
Opal Olive Wilcox, daughter of Harry and Lily Wilcox. She would have been my great aunt.
Okay. So, was Olive married to Vern?
Actually, we called her Opal, and yeah. They lived in that, what used to be a greenhouse on South Main, or North Main.
And were they the parents then of Verna and Maxine who?
Just Maxine. They had one child, Maxine.
And maybe her first name was Verna, but they just called her Maxine. Because I've got Verna Maxine Hoot. And I think
it was Maxine Hoot, and then her married name was Witter.
Okay.
I don't think so, but
O.A. Farmer, parade supervisor, was a member of the parade committee and spent considerable time locating ancient firearms as well as horses and buggies for use in the parade. Olin A. Farmer was born in 1891 and died in 1961. He and his wife Agnes are buried in Mount Hope Cemetery. So I know James Blaney's wife was a farmer. Was she somehow related?
not to me.
No one knows.
That's a
Excuse me. Children's Day was held Wednesday with the Children's Parade starting from the high school campus at 2 o'clock. Game and contests were held for the children in the Second Ward Park throughout the afternoon. Spalding Park, located in the Second Ward, was presented to the city as a gift of Alonzo Spalding when he, with J.E. Goodnow and Z. Livermore, had platted the town. For a number of years, it was used as a children's playground under the supervision of the PTA. It was still a popular spot for picnics in 1938.
Where was it?
Second Ward,
I know, but where?
Greg's Hardware. Greg's. Yeah.
Oh, that'd be east of Briggs.
before Little Bear?
Yep.
Yes.
historical window displays were unveiled and a music festival was held on the school campus. The then recently organized Maquoketa High School Band had presented concerts weekly in Maquoketa during the summer months and played an important role in the centennial program. The band was under the direction of Roy T. Schwab. The Maquoketa High School was built in 1908. The old academy burned down the night of December 28, 1921, and was remembered fondly by many Maquoketa citizens, past and present. Roy T. Schwab, instrumental music teacher, was born in Oxford Junction, Iowa, the son of Andrew and Minnie Turkle Schwab. On August 20th, 1923, he married Irma Seacrest of Springville, where they had always made their home. And I'm not sure, was Springville, is that close by here?
Yeah.
Springville?
By Cedar Rapids.
By Cedar Rapids, okay.
Cedar Rapids, Marion, yeah.
He was a member of the Springville Methodist Church, Masonic Lodge, Lions Club, and Cedar Rapids Consistory and Shrine. He received his education from the Institute Grand River, Austinburg, Ohio, also the University of Iowa and Cornell College. 1938 centennial events are listed. The pageant portrayed the early history of Iowa and Jackson County and was directed by Roy C. Hurd. Mrs. Lucia Thorne was the director of choral work, and Mrs. John Wantz directed the choral groups. The first episode, Beginnings of Iowa, with scenes depicting the coming of Marquette and Joliet, the arrival of Julian Dubuque, Iowa becoming a territory, and the inauguration of the first governor. First episode, Scene 1, under the direction of the American Legion and the Legion Auxiliary. The cast were, I'm going to be going through a lot of photos. I guess if you want to raise your hand if you knew some of these people, I think there'll be a number that will know many of them. Marquette, played by Stanley Swaney. His family were some of the first settlers in Van Buren Township. Joliet, played by T.E. Riley. The Frenchman, played by Donald Matthias, Walter Merriman, Dr. R.W. Benson, William Mudd, and Byron Evans. Indian Chief was played by H.D. Keeley. Harold Dewey Keeley was born in Maquoketa and graduated from MHS in 1916. He was active in sports, participating in both football and basketball. He was also on the advertising committee and editor-in-chief of Chalk. He and his wife, Rachel Foraker, were the parents of Myrtle, Robert, Vivian Lee, and Rachel Ann. And I think probably many of you knew the Keeley family.
Yes, I did. I came down here for my first job, and I was interviewed in his office.
Oh,
H.D.
okay.
Keeley. That's a long time ago.
The Braves were played by Art Hickson, Glenn Rathbun, Robert Hopus, Thad Harrington, Donald Hoffman, Georgia Knacker, Charles Edwards, Darrell Hoot, Paul Pursley, and Lawrence DeSpagle. Photos shown of Georgia Knacker on left and Paul Pursley on right. Paul was active in high school and served on the Exodus staff for 4 years. Squaws were played by Elsie Smith, Opal Rossman, Gladys Hickson, Wilma Martin, Iola Pangborn, Florence Lane, Mary Greger, Blanche Beaton, Louise Beaton, Jane McGowan, Lolita Benson, and Eula Riley. Shown is Blanche Beaton with her daughters Evelyn and Janice. Indian children were played by Ruth Lilla Alden, Eula Hickson, Joanne Smith, Barbara Norton, Dorothy Krager, Mary Darlene Fleming, Evelyn Beaton, Wilda Graw, and Janice Beaton. The same Indian braves, squaws, and children appeared in Scene 2, the coming of Julian Dubuque, with Dr. R.W. Benson in the role of Dubuque. Dr. Ralph Willis Benson was born in O'Brien County, Iowa, and he is buried in the Lost Nation Cemetery. He was married to Lolita Helena Kuhlman, and they were the parents of 3 children. And I think, Bonnie, you did some programs on Dr. Benson. First episode, Scene 3, was sponsored by the citizens of Andrew. Included in Scene 3 was Iowa becoming a territory and the inauguration of the first governor. First territorial governor was Robert Lucas, played by Dr. W.L. Ted Rance. Dr. Rance died at age 77, and he and his wife Belle are buried in the Andrews Cemetery. When Iowa was a U.S. territory, there were 3 different governors, all appointed by the U.S. President. Robert Lucas, who served from 1838 to 1841, was appointed by Martin Van Buren. John Chambers was appointed by John Tyler and served from 1841 to 45. James Clark was appointed by James Polk. A cast of Andrews citizens, and this is not actually the Andrews citizens shown, represent the audience who witnessed the inauguration of Iowa's first governor. And the members of the crowd included Mrs. J.H. Molinoff, Mrs. J.L. Ripple, Mrs. Harold Ripple, Catherine Goddell, Mrs. Lizzie Sheets, and Mrs. Mary Getler. Ansel Briggs was played by his great-grandson, Alexander Robertson. Alexander Robertson was the son of Ansel's daughter, Nancy Briggs Robertson. Chief Justice Mason was played by A.E. Stamp. Charles Mason was born in New York and became a patent attorney, taught engineering, and was the Chief of Justice of the Iowa Territorial Supreme Court from 1838 to 1846, and then became the first Chief Justice of the Iowa Supreme Court when Iowa was granted statehood, and he served from 1846 to 1847. The second episode included portrayals of the beginning of Jackson County, showing the arrival of early settlers, the Bellevue War, and an early church. So this was a quote from the Journal of a Missionary in Jackson County, Iowa Territory, 1843 to 1846, by William Salter. In Maquoketa, we organized a temperance society with 100 members and kept the liquor traffic out of the settlement. Do we have anybody here from Andrew? We were not so successful at Andrew. Though it's I know. Though a society was organized there with 50 members, I don't know how many people would have been there at that time.
They would have been all the Lutherans, I'm sure.
And he preached. He said, I had preached 326 sermons in Jackson County, 100 of them in sod-covered schoolhouses in Maquoketa, 40 at Andrew, and 186 in other parts of the county. Maybe he should have did the 186 at Andrew and reverse that. Second episode, scene 1, under the direction of Mr. and Mrs. J. Goodnow, John Wright, Mrs. Melvin Joyner, and Mr. and Mrs. J.C. McIntyre, depicting the arrival of a group of early settlers coming in a covered wagon train. And again, this is just a picture I found, but is not them. Mr. and Mrs. J.E. Goodnow, first settlers of Maquoketa, which I know everybody in here knows that. They were played by their great-grandchildren, Johnny Goodnow, and Johnny Goodnow Jr. and Dorothy Goodnow. Shown is Dorothy Goodnow. I couldn't really find any more information about her. I don't know if she married and moved away or... John Elliott, J.E. Goodnow, was a practicing attorney for many years in Maquoketa. Maxine Lucille Sagers portrayed a settler woman. She was the daughter of Milton Oscar Sagers and Cecilia Marie Nissen Sagers, and she was the wife of J.E. Goodnow. Other settlers were portrayed by, I'm just going to read the last names, Ellis, McIntyre, Farmer, Lackey, Shannon, Henry, Krause, Jacobson, Stockham, Alden, Martin, Blakely, Anderson, Wendell, and I think I got it. Oh, and then there was a Donaldson, a Schmidt, Bradley, Myers, and Martin. And Agnes Bush, and she would have graduated probably in 1936. And Eleanor Parkhouse. Eleanor Parkhouse graduated from MHS and was very involved in student activities. She acted in plays, was on the tumbling team, and was a student council officer. She also participated in Glee Club, Latin Club, French Club, and mixed chorus. Another couple portraying settlers were Mr. and Mrs. Robert Grappengetter. Robert Benjamin Bob Grappengetter, born in Davenport, was known as Bob the Florist, and died at the Jackson County Public Hospital at age 75. He and his wife are buried in Davenport, and her maiden name was Selma Schowendellen. William Risser purchased Bob's floral shop in Maquoketa, which he later sold, and then it became known as Brenda's Flowers, which was later sold. and is now the Iowa Flower Market. Shown is an early advertisement of Bob the Florist from a high school yearbook. Mr. and Mrs. Fred Goodnow portrayed settlers. Frederick B. Goodnow was born in Jackson County to George and Ella Levin Goodnow. He was well-known and enterprising agriculturalist and stock raiser of South Fork Township, was busily engaged in the operation of a farm comprising of 130 acres. His parents were natives of Jackson County. His grandparents were Mr. and Mrs. George E. Goodnow. His grandfather was born in the old Decker House in Maquoketa on the 26th of February, 1858. Frederick and his wife Julia are buried at Mount Hope. Mrs. Leroy Schrader and children portrayed settlers. Carol Jessie Dodie Schrader, wife of Leroy Schrader, was born in 1899. Carol and Leroy were the parents of Asher Lee and Carl Christian George Schrader and Carol Lee Schrader Edwards. Asher was a well-known attorney in Maquoketa and served on the board for many years. Leroy was a mayor of Maquoketa for many years and later served 2 terms as county attorney. Shown in the photo are Asher and his sister. I couldn't find a picture of his brother.
Yeah, well, she had another sister,
She had another one?
older one. An
Oh.
older one.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was her name?
I'm trying to think. We're thinking, I just know.
So maybe she died before, because
No, she lived in California. She moved away. She lived in California.
I don't think she was listed in the obituary. Mrs. Jake Ross portrayed a settler woman. I don't remember Irma. She used to live in one of the apartments, Main Street apartments up above. Yeah, Irma. Irma D. Ross was born in 1889 and died in 1983 and is buried in Mount Hope with her husband. And she was the mother of Doris Ellen Ross Dutton and John Worden Ross. Harry Hicks Jr., a 1935 MHS graduate, portrayed a settler. He was the husband of Lois Bramer and the father of Warren Hicks. Mrs. Harry Sharp portrayed a settler. Mary Mildred Walker Sharp was a former Maquoketa school teacher and librarian. Does anybody know then, was she the Maquoketa librarian? She was. Martha Lemcool, Mrs. Dale Easton, portrayed a settler. Shown is her picture of her husband Dale. Martha and Dale were the parents of Laura Easton Manis, Gertrude Martha Easton Hughes Wiersma. She was a VPW member. Gerald Elizabeth Easton Pithan and Harlan Dale Easton. Another settler portrayal was by James E. Blaney. James was born June 27, 1916 in Maquoketa, the son of Edgar and Leona Pleaser Blaney. He graduated from MHS and attended the junior college here and also Grinnell College. Graduated in 1938. He married Vivian Farmer in Maquoketa. Jim worked at B&Z Mill and Feed in Maquoketa for 20 years. He was a U.S. Army veteran, having served in World War II. He was also a member of the Maquoketa Rotary Club, Optimist Club, and Boy Scouts. He was survived by his daughter Karen of Florida and his son James of Minneapolis, and had one granddaughter, Laura. And the Blaneys had donated a building to the Chamber of Commerce some years back, which was supposed to be for them to be there, but then it got sold, and the chamber moved across the street. George E. Goodnow Jr., son of Frederick and Julia Goodnow, portrayed a settler. And I have his copy of the 1938 Centennial Edition that I used to get all this information. And I knew he and his wife Gertie, and they lived along the Mississippi. And George was an avid fisherman, and I've also been finding a lot of pictures of him testing out engines, Clinton engines on the Mississippi. Gerald Paul Calkins, son of Merle Dean Calkins and Anna Catherine Bach, portrayed a settler. He was raised by his grandparents, George Otto and Violet Dean, and was a veteran of World War II. And his grandmother was the one that had owned the mirror. Citizens of Bellevue were under the direction of William Boland. Refought the Bellevue War, the battle between Bellevue citizens and the outlaws that took place in 1840. And I was going to read, but I think we're behind. There were like 25 people that were in that cast. Early school scene showing last day of school was sponsored by 4th Ward PTA, supervised by Mrs. Pierce Mitchell, Mrs. A.J. Hodgson, and Mrs. Earl Royer. The teacher was played by A.J. Hodgson, school director played by Harold Hodgson, and shown is a 1910 photo of 4th Ward School. Did anyone besides me go to 4th Ward? Thelma, Mrs. Pierce Mitchell, is shown in the photo, and that is your mother-in-law.
Mother.
Mother, that's your mother.
Yeah, that's mother.
Well, she did.
She was in this.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, my mom taught there. That's what, she was in her class.
And a lot of you will know this lady in this picture. Patricia Boyer, Mrs. Bill O'Donnell, played a part as a pupil. And I think she's still living like near DeWitt.
Yeah, she is at Wheatland.
She's at Wheatland. Okay. Adelaide Sharp portrayed a pupil, shown as her yearbook photo. Frank Mitchell was another pupil. Okay, so now that was your...
Let's see, what year was that?
He would have graduated maybe in 23.
He would be a nephew of my dad's.
Okay. So your
I
cousin.
think
Your
that's
cousin.
it. Yeah.
Your cousin. Okay.
And
As was George Spalding. George was the former owner of Spalding's Shoe Store and was married to Sue Schinthaler, the daughter of local attorney Everett Schinthaler. Tom Cahill portrayed a student, and this Tom is Northamont's brother. Alice Hinckley was another student. And there was a Hinckley's drugstore, right?
Yeah,
and so that was probably her parents? Early church services were sponsored by the Methodist Church, shown is an early 1900 photo of the Reformed Church at Buckhorn. Minister was played by Reverend H. Dill, and members of the congregation were played by, I'm just going to mention some names that I think that you probably know, Forrest Clark, Howard Sagers, L.H. Rasmussen, Alta Benton, Agnes Bush, Harold Sagers, Mrs. Harold Sagers, Betty Southers, and Mary Darlene Fleming, and there were others. Mrs. Charles Anderson and Mrs. Clem Reedinger were in charge of the Farm Bureau's presentation of the first wedding in the county. Cast in a wedding scene with W.F. Myers, Walter Moeller, F.R. Fairman, Bert Romer, Sam Wilcox, Edna Coke Miller. Carol Reedinger also appeared in the wedding scene, and she's pictured here with her siblings, and she's in the back row on the right. Farm Bureau gave a demonstration of how work used to be done on the farm. And again, this was just a picture. The Singing Society, under the direction of Miss Lucia Thorne. Lucia Thorne was the daughter of Madge Wilbur Watkins and Thomas George Thorne. Before completing her senior year at MHS, she had received her education in Kewanee, Illinois. And the Singing Society members included Charles Tubbs and Ray Grove, R.G. Mann, Rex Harrington, Junior Hicks, Archie Bentley, Roy Thompson, Jack Weary, Mrs. Burton Burleson, Mrs. Hugo Stack, Mr. and Mrs. Ralph G., Agnes Bush, Margaret Ellen Crawford, Alberta Williams, Evelyn Myatt, Mrs. Roy Thompson, Mary McGinn, Marion Ellis, Mrs. L.H. Rasmussen, Mrs. J.B. Ellis, and Vivian McDonald. And Charles Anderson. So I'm wondering, was Charles Bob's brother? Yes?
He was raised in the house right next to us.
Okay. Were there more boys in that family? just the two. And Margaret Joyner, I think probably most of you knew Margaret. And Blanche Stockham. Also, Winfeld Rimmer, Frank Roy Kozak, and Helen Jeannie Krause. Civil War veterans were portrayed by W.H. Morse of Wyoming and James Sutton of Maquoketa, who's pictured in this photo. Spanish War veterans were portrayed by Clinton Woods, Ed Gurius, Jim Van Amberg, all of Maquoketa, and Frank Tripp of Preston. Members of Timber City Post of American Legion represented the World War. So Clinton Columbus Woods was born in 1872 in Jackson County. And he was married to Gertrude Emma Hurst. They had married in 1901. He was the son of Robert Nelson Wood, and his father was in the 2nd Iowa Company M Cavalry. And his great-uncle was Colonel J.J. Woods. Ed Gurius, who's pictured in the photo, was a private in Company M with the 49th Regiment, Iowa, and was in the Spanish-American War. Frank Tripp, who was born in 1875, is buried in Miles Cemetery with his wife, Jo. Youth organizations passed before the Queen. Girl Scouts were Bee Ehrlich, Charlotte Connery, Dorothy Seville, Doris Ellen Ross, Mary Ellen Davis, Virginia Bush, and Susan Banghart. And Lois Ann Knorr. Do you know Lois? Jackie Lane, Hope Jenkins, Margaret Jordan, Agnes Bush, Doris Suthers, and Betty McNerney. Boy Scouts included Paul Pursley, Jack Sagers, Charles Edwards, Cletus Hoot, Bill Brown, Gail Grant, Lawrence DeSpagle, Albert and Alan Brady. Shown is a picture of a 1938 Eagle Scout in uniform. Also, Thad Harrington, whose father was Claude. Claude was a longtime businessman, electrician, and he sold appliances. Donald Hoffman, and George Acker. George was the manager of the JCPenney store. He and his wife had 2 children, and they built a new home on the corner of Pleasant and Prospect. So I'm wondering, is that where Terry Rubel lives, maybe? Because the other corner would be the Squire. And Forrest Clark, Jimmy Wendell, Cubs, Charles Gallagher, Billy and Eddie Carson, Glenn Crawford, George Spalding, Bobby Keeley. Sea Scouts were James Crawford, Frederick and Otis Joyner, Gerald Calkins, Milo Albright, Joe Ehrlich, Albert McIntyre, and Art Fisher. Cub Scout Billy Carson. Sea Scout Albert McIntyre, and this is his high school photo. Shown is a list of those serving on the General Committee. Dr. Harry L. Sharp Maquoketa, and he was a prominent dentist and civic leader, and he died after an emergency operation. He was just 47 years old. O.W. Otis Joyner was a wine producer, farmer, and timber grower in Joynerville, South Fork Township. He was the husband of Emma Gold and Charlotte Kundal. The largest exclusive ladies' apparel shop in Maquoketa was the R.G. Mann store, which opened in 1931. E.L. Schinthaler, Everett, husband of Dorothy and father of Sue Spalding, Carol Jean Carpenter, and David Schinthaler. Everett practiced law in his firm, Schinthaler and Schinthaler. Business and professional women were in charge of costuming. Margaret Joel served as chairman. She was assisted by Frances Barcelow, Eleanor Goodall, Louise Mayoffy, Cecile Rowling, and Minnie Hegstrom. Makeup committee members are shown. Other members of the makeup committee were Blanche Stockham and Fern Summers, and Virginia Dyer. High school girls appearing in the pageant were Marie Ralston, May Beth Throckmorton, Margaret Campbell, Margaret Lancaster, Shirley Snell, Dorothy Mae Graver, Betty Jean Wyrick, Gloria Murray, and Doris Jean Bowman. Also, Imogene von Schrader, Lorraine Smith, Nedra Evans, Elizabeth Nissen, Elmeretta Bowman, who's Judy Kuhn's mother-in-law, Beverly Schnell, and Merle Turner. That's all? Yes.
Are you done?
I'm done.
Okay. Going back to that mirror, how big was that mirror?
And I gave the dimensions at the beginning. I think it
No,
was
I
just,
missed it. Okay, hold on.
it was just,
It was just a little one?
yeah, it was just a little mirror. A little mirror. So it's just kind of, I found fascinating that, you know, it's such a big deal with that generation, the generations before, and then whoops,
Somebody
You know?
thought it was junk. They must have written on it.
I don't know.
So who was the last person that was that?
Was it Violet Calkins?
Viola, yeah, that's what I wrote, the sixth on there. History.
But they don't, you know, it's just, it,
It looked like the frame was way bigger than the mirror.
so maybe someday, you know, it'll be found, because if they put that same paper back, I don't know. Anyone else have any comments or corrections on any of the people in the presentation?
The last it was seen was in Clinton County, right?
Excuse me?
The last time it was, that people were aware of it was in Clinton County?
No, I think it was here.
It was
It
here?
was here, because she lived here.
Okay.
I don't know if that's that same, if they're related to the family, if they get in the coffins, like in Wyoming, that big barn and house. I'm not sure how they're related. I don't know on that. But that would be interesting. Maybe they have the mirror there, you know? That would be worth checking out.
So when was the last time that mirror was in the scene in Maquoketa, during this?
I don't have a way to look that up. I know that in 1938 it was here, but I don't know for how long she kept it or who she gave it to. So I mean, that's quite a few years, but yeah. So it wasn't Maquoketa's mirror to start with. No. It was not Maquoketa's mirror. Which it couldn't be, because it was older than Maquoketa. So it couldn't be Maquoketa's original. But anyway, so it gets you thinking, so yeah. So if anybody can find out where that mirror is, that'd be great.
It's still in the.
We'd love to have it at the museum.
We would. That was really nice.
I'd just like everybody to thank, I'd like to thank Sue first of all, and I'd just like everybody to think this was the 100th anniversary of the city of Maquoketa, long time ago. But just kind of tuck away in your mind, there's going to be a lot of information coming out. In 2026, we will be celebrating the 250th birthday of our nation. That's just 2 or 3 years from now. So our federal government already is beginning to gear up with plans. It'll be a year-long celebration. It'll start on Memorial Day of 2025, and it'll end on the 4th of July, 2026. 1776 was the day. So 4th of July. So we already know that Iowa, the state of Iowa, is going to play a big part in this, because they are requesting, I don't know if it's happened yet, but they are going to request that there be something equivalent to the World's Fair, which they don't have anymore. And that they're going to request that take place at the Iowa State Fairgrounds in Des Moines. that would be a great feather in Iowa's cap, I believe, if that were to happen. And every state in the union is being asked to do an exhibit for that event. Like I said, it'll be a year-long event. There's going to be something called the Patriot Games, I believe, which will be competitions of high school students and different sporting events. I bet they will be spread around the country, I would imagine. But, you know, 250th anniversary of our country, a really big thing, a year-long event, and it's going to take a lot of preparation to get geared up for that. So look for a lot of things like this to happen. Maybe, again, recreations of the Bellevue War and who knows what. But be thinking, because I think Jackson County would like to play a teeny part in all of that. So any ideas that anybody has would be wonderful. So again, thank you to Sue, thank all of you for coming. Have a great week.